Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on how to approach the 2023 med school application cycle. My name is Hallie Caldwell, and I work with Inspira Advantage, and we are a company that focuses on helping med school applicants get into their top school choices, help prepare for the application process, write essays, study for tests, kind of everything within that. We have a couple panelists today who have been working with Inspira Advantage as admissions counselors. They're wonderful. I'll have them introduce themselves in just a moment. So today we'll go over just basics for the application process and cycle. We'll go through a month-by-month guide, talking about what kind of a checklist of to-dos for each month for the next year, how to prepare for the application process. We'll talk about tips for success, and then we'll have a Q&A. So if you have any questions during this, feel free to pop your questions into the Q&A, and we'll get to those at the end. Today we have Deanna and Parth with us. Deanna, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Deanna. I am a third-year surgical resident doing a research fellowship right now, actually, and just, looking forward to sharing what we have to know about getting in medical school.
Parth.
Sure. And my name's Parth. I'm a first-year internal medicine resident, and just wanted to echo what Deanna said about just sharing advice and just answering any questions about getting into medical school. I know could definitely be a daunting process.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, both of you. All right, so we're just going to dive in and go have an overview about the 2023-2024 application cycle. Okay,
so I can start in the beginning. So I think you may or may not be familiar with just like the general timeline. So MCAT, which is the main application platform for all allopathic medical schools, that opens up usually, the date varies a little bit, but it's early May. It's usually around the first week. And it allows you to just start submitting information, inputting information. You can't actually submit the application until the end of the month, but you can start putting in basic information and start filling it out throughout the whole month of May. And the other platforms, so this the one for Texas medical schools and also for osteopathic medical schools, opens around the same time in early May. That one you could submit a little bit earlier in May as well. But the MCAT, which is the one for allopathic medical schools, is usually somewhere around to the end of May is when the first time you could submit. And then after that, there's like a little bit of a review process where they verify your grades and all the stuff with the transcripts that you send over. And then you'll probably get into June, July, where schools will start to receive applications a little bit later in that July period. And then you'll start to get secondary applications towards the end of July, maybe even August. The only exception to that is early decision applications. So some schools allow for early decision. Not all of them do, but the whole application is due usually around early August. And you'll get a decision much earlier than you would for other schools. And that time of decision usually varies. Sometimes it could be as early as the end of August. And if you do get in, it's very similar to college early decisions where if you do get in, it's binding. And if you don't get in, you get your applications put into the regular application cycle and you can submit to other schools as well. And then the secondary deadlines vary tremendously from school to school. It's anywhere from September to December. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but we do recommend trying to submit as early as you can. Usually there's like a 2-week window we try to recommend in which to turn around the secondary applications, and the length of secondary applications can definitely vary. Some are very simple. It's just a couple of click boxes, while others have more involved personal essays and really to figure out if you do fit in with the schools themselves.
Awesome. We'll talk a little bit more about secondaries.
So the application process that Parth was just referring to is usually called the primary application. That's like all the basic information, your experiences, and your personal statement will go in there as well. After you have chosen the schools that you're going to apply to and they have received your application, most of them, if not all of them, some of them don't, will send you a secondary application. This secondary application comes about 2 to 4 weeks after you send in the primary application, and they usually involve a multitude of questions. They can be pretty far ranging, and there's not necessarily a type of question that you can expect because all the schools ask very different things. Some of them are just yes, no questions like, have you ever lived here before? Do you have any sort of ties to this geographical location? Some of them will be like short answer essay questions that are asking you a little bit more than your primary application as to why you may want to go to that specific school. And so you'll have to answer with some specifics about that program in particular. Some of them will want to know a little bit more about your extracurriculars, and some of them are going to be full-length essays that just want more detail into some various topics that they talk about that they're interested in. Once you get these primary applications, your email inbox kind of fills up, and they will typically all have a deadline for them. I've seen some in December and January, but in reality, if you're submitting these primary applications and receiving the secondary applications in the, early summer or late summer, then those secondaries should be returned as soon as possible. Because while, yes, they give you a deadline in January, that doesn't mean that we want to use that as our, let's wait till the last minute to submit these. Most medical schools have rolling admissions processes where they take applications as they come. They don't necessarily look at all the applications at one date. So they may have interviewed people by the time December and January have come about. And so you want to definitely get those secondaries done as soon as possible. And that way they also know that you're more interested in going to their school. If you're taking forever to submit the secondaries, they may just kind of forget about you. But definitely an important part of the process.
All right, we'll talk a little bit more about MCAS.
Okay, so MCAS, like we said, is like the main platform for most allopathic medical schools. So we talked a little bit about the timeline for it and how that can vary a little bit. So like we had said, you can start to submit at the end of May of every year your full application. And so there's going to be a little bit of a period of a processing period, mostly to verify your grades. You're going to have to send over, or your school will send over your transcript to the main MCAS office, which I believe is in DC. And then it's going to be, there's a painstaking process where the coursework is verified and given the calculations of GPA. So many different colleges have different grading schemes. So this verification process puts everyone on the same playing field, and they get a GPA verification using the same general criteria, so everyone can be compared to one another, even if different colleges might have different grading schemes. And then after that, then your application will be delivered to all the med schools that you had originally applied to. And then all the letters of eval are also received by them, and then the MCAT scores are automatically put into the system as well, since it's the same general organization that runs the MCAT. This processing can definitely vary. Sometimes at the beginning of the application cycle, it could be fairly quickly. You can get it back in as quick as a week, but as you get into the application cycle, so somewhere in mid-June, later June, and then into July, it could take almost 3 weeks at times for the application process to be verified. So we always recommend to try to finish it as early as possible. Not only have the processing finished, but also then your application will be one of the first to get delivered to all the med schools that you hope to eventually attend or interview for, at least.
All right, so we'll dive into month by month essential steps now.
So October to December of 2022, which ideally is your junior year, it could be your senior year if you're planning to take a year off in between college and medical school. But during this time, this is when you need to be keeping your GPA as strong as possible, especially your what's called your BCPM GPA, which is biology, chemistry, physics, and math. Those classes will be categorized separately from your overall GPA and turned into a separate GPA that the medical schools will evaluate on your application. You also want to make sure that you're getting all your prerequisite courses done, and also start studying for the MCAT. This is a big test. It's going to be very relevant to all those science classes that you've been taking all this time. And so this is definitely the time to start doing some preparation for the test and making sure that you're looking towards the dates that you want to take the test. Ideally, you take the test in December, January of this year. And so that way, if you've started studying in October or sometime in the fall semester, then you can be as prepared as possible for that December test, but also giving yourself opportunities to retake the test later in the spring if that's necessary for you. Also, during this time, you should be really looking into the extracurricular experiences that will really boost your application. These can be many different things, but the ones that the medical schools are looking for are really shadowing. You definitely need to be shadowing doctors in your community so that you can show medical schools that you have a good sense of what it means to go to work every day as a doctor. And it also gives you some valuable insight into some of the things that you can look for in your future career and be able to speak to that in a medical school interview. These shadowing experiences are extremely valuable and you should seek them out as much as possible. Other clinical experiences can be paid or unpaid. Those would be things like working in an ER, in some sort of medical center, or maybe even as an EMT. But there are a lot of things you can do. Scribing is very popular as well. Students can also work in pharmacies or physical therapy clinics. Things like this will give you exposure to the medical field. While not necessarily being exposed to physicians, you are being exposed to patients and patient care and what it means to, be in this environment and understand all of the players that work in these situations. Also, when it comes to volunteer work, this is going to be stuff that you're going to want to put on your application. And this is a great time to start building this into your schedule so that you can, look for these experiences and have them during this fall semester, even before or after as well. They should continue on into the spring as much as you can incorporate them into your schedule. The admissions committees really want to know that you have what it takes to be a physician. So you have demonstrated that you have experience seeing this field and understanding what you're getting yourself into, really.
And jumping off of that, so once you start to get into January of the application cycle or the year that you intend to apply, there's a couple of things you want to keep in mind. So one, this pre-health advising committee, it varies school to school. So some schools have one, some schools don't. And if they do have one, I would definitely recommend reaching out to them even sooner than January 2023, but at least by January 2023, you want to seek them out, wanting to let them know that you're going to be applying, but also just to figure out what sort of requirements they have for getting a committee letter. So a committee letter is essentially just a stamp of approval from your school saying that they think that you'll be a competitive applicant. Some schools will just, they help you send all of your letters to this advising committee and they put it all together in one packet with like a sort of like a cover head letter, sort of combining all of the stuff and the work that you've done throughout college. And there isn't much of a process there. Other schools, I've heard that they have an interview process in which to gain their stamp of approval. So it very much varies college and university from all of them. So you do want to seek them out at least by January 2023, if not earlier, just to let them know you're applying and figure out what the process might be to get a committee letter. It is recommended to have a committee letter if that is an option that your school has. If they don't have a committee letter, then That's no fault of your own, and you could proceed with the application just by submitting the individual letters to AMCAS, like you probably had done for your college applications. So another thing you want to do is just make sure that you will be on track to finish all the prereqs that you need for medical school, at least by the time you are graduating college. So you just want to look into some of the schools that you're interested in. Almost all of the schools will list out on their websites their prereq courses. So you want to just go through them and make sure that you have taken all of the courses, or you will have at least taken all of them by the time you graduate and prior to your matriculation at any of the med schools. And then following along with that, there's this thing called the MSAR, which is sort of a guide. It's called I think it stands for the Medical School Admission Requirements. And it's a guide that's put out by AMCAS, and they list out a lot of the med schools in the country, almost all of them. And they list out the requirements. They give you what the admissions profile is of the most recent class. They'll give you average GPAs, etc. Some of the work that the students have done, volunteering, shadowing, some of the things that Deanna was talking about. It helps you to figure out, one, what type of schools, where you would like to go to school and learn more about the school, but also to see how you compare to some of the previous students or the first year class from the prior year, and how your sort of your stats and experiences match up to some of the other students. And then you do want to try to take the MCAT by January of this year at the latest. It's going to be, like Deanna was saying, this is a really big test, so you want to give yourself enough time to study. But also, if you don't get the score you're hoping for, this still gives you a little bit of time towards the end of the spring semester to retake the MCAT prior to your application going forward later in that summer. And then finally, you just want to continue seeking out those experiences and continue to do those. So similar to what Deanna was talking about with shadowing, volunteering, scribing, you just want to continue those activities. One, it'll just continue to give you exposure to the medical field, but also just work experience in general, or just experience balancing schoolwork with other extracurricular activities, which just shows medical schools that you can be a well-rounded applicant and continue to make contributions to the medical community once you do end up matriculating at one of the med schools.
As you go into this next month of your junior year, this is really when you want to start focusing on identifying who might be the people that could write letters of recommendation for you. And you want to start asking them for those letters of recommendation. There are a lot of different types of letters that you can get, different types of people that you can ask, but the medical schools are really looking for mostly academic letters, but also people that can speak to your character and who know you well enough to be able to write a high quality letter. Your science faculty members are going to be probably the most common people that are asked for a letter. If you've done any research, if you've been any sort of teaching assistant, if you worked in a lab, anyone that knows you a little bit more than the average student in their classroom. Also, if you've shadowed any doctors, if you've expressed interest in these doctors that you want to go to medical school and you've spent enough time with them that they know you pretty well, that would be a great person to ask, because they know exactly what you're about to go through and they can speak to that in their letter. If you have any job, or if you're in any extracurricular activities, and the people that you're working for in that leadership role can write you a letter, they would be able to speak pretty highly about you, I would hope. And then, just anybody that you think would be able to write you a high quality letter. And there's many ways that you can ask these people to write you letters. In person is going to be the most preferred approach, but email works too. I like to say that if you ask somebody in person, you can get a pretty good sense as to whether that person is really enthusiastic and willing to write you the letter, or if they're just kind of agreeing because you asked. And so you don't necessarily get that interaction over email. So I always like to recommend that you ask in person if possible. Sometimes it's not possible, especially with classes the way they are now. Sometimes email is the only way. But make sure that these people are willing to write you a high quality letter. And it's okay to ask them, do you feel comfortable writing me a good letter for medical school? Because that way you can feel good about the person that you've asked, and you know that that's going to be a strong letter going onto your application. Sometimes these letter writers may ask you for some supporting information to help them write the letter, especially if maybe they don't know you quite as well as they want to, but they're willing to write you the letter. They may ask for something like your transcript, maybe a resume or a list of activities that you've been involved in. If you have any awards or accomplishments, they would want a list of those as well. So it's always good to have a running resume that you can send out to people. Also, you want to keep in mind when you're asking these letter writers what deadlines you might be working towards. Give them enough time to write these letters and to get them submitted to your application. So the application opens in May, which would be the first time that you could get into the application to submit something. And so you want to make sure that you're giving them enough time to do it, and also reminding them appropriately in the next couple months if they haven't finished it yet for you. But during this time, you also want to continue looking at schools like Parth was talking about with the MSAR. Building a list of schools is at this point good, because you're looking towards the future. You're making sure you have all the prerequisites and requirements that they want for you to apply to their school, and you're giving yourself enough time to make up for anything that you may lack. Also, you want to start building a list of schools that are on par with your current scores and what you're capable of getting into. That's what we call a balanced school list. You have a list of schools that includes your high-reaching schools, the schools that have grades that are pretty well aligned with your grades, and then schools that might be more of a safety situation where you exceed their average expectations.
And then following that along, so once you start to get it into the mid-spring time around March, so like Deanna was saying, you want to continue to give the recommenders that you had chosen, that you wished them to write your letters for you, give them any additional materials that they asked for, like Deanna was talking about, whether it's a resume, list of awards, etc. And I like to always say that you want to give them at least a month, probably a little bit more, to be able to write your letters. Most of them are going to be college professors or doctors or very busy people, and you want to give them plenty of time to be able to write a good, strong letter for you. It's not going to happen in a day or two, so you definitely want to give them plenty of time. And keeping in mind this deadline of the end of May, of what you want to have, if not earlier, and sometime in May, if not earlier, to have all of these letters in. Most of the time, when I'm talking to students, this is the part that really holds the application up. This is the hardest because it's not something that you can control. You do need to follow up. You will probably need to follow up with your recommenders and just give them a little bit of nudge. If you're like 2 weeks out, you just want to let them know, like, hey, this application is opening up in May, and I'd really like to be able to submit this on time, and just let them know if there's any other materials that you could provide them that might help them facilitate writing this letter. And just keeping in mind that they're going to be busy, and it's okay to continue to reach out if they haven't done so. So you can shoot them an email, give their office a call, whatever you need to do. Because they know that this is a big part of your application. So it's not that they would have forgotten, it's just something probably came up otherwise. So it's okay to remind your letter writers. So like I was talking about before with the MCAT, if you do need to retake it, if you had taken it in January, it gives you plenty of time to reevaluate your study plan, reach out to mentors, advisors, and game plan a little bit more if you do need to retake it. If not, if you don't and you're happy with your score, that's great. That's one big part of your application that's already done, and you could focus on the main part of your exam. The main part of your application, sorry. And then finally, you could decide whether or not to take, whether you do want to take this AAMC preview exam. This is a newer requirement. This stands for the Professional Readiness Exam. It's a judgment exam that some schools take into account. There's a list on the AAMC page if you just type in AAMC preview exam. It really incorporates a lot of some of the core requirements and core competencies that medical schools are hoping to develop in their medical students by the time they graduate. And this just helps them gauge where you are prior to that. So this is going to be used more going in the future. And 2022 is one of the earlier times where it was used. And a lot of schools were just using it for research purposes and seeing how they did. But as we move forward, I think it seems like more and more schools will continue to use it and actually use the exam as part of the application and not only just for research purposes. But there's a list on the AMC page, and if one of the schools you're interested in applying to is using it, we would definitely recommend registering and do take the exam.
So as you move on to April, you're now in the last month before the application opens. This would be the time to take the MCAT for the absolute latest time that you possibly could, because it does take a couple weeks for your scores to come back. And so as long as you're within the first half of April, you will be sure to get your score back in time for the application submission by the end of May. This would definitely be the latest possible time in order to get that score on your application right off the bat. Even though your applications are not going to open until May, it's definitely time to start working on your personal statement, or at least brainstorming ideas of things that you can put in your personal statement with your first draft. This is, depending on if you like to write or not, this is going to flow out of you, or it's going to be very difficult. And you need to prepare and give yourself time to really mull over this paper that you're going to write, because you want it to portray you in the best possible light while also getting all of your points across. So this is the time to start thinking about that and getting that first draft written. It's also a good time to start compiling a list of all of the activities that you've done while in college. Essentially making your resume is the best way to start with this, where you compile the list of activities like volunteering, work experience, maybe research experience if you have any, and getting those all written down on paper so that when it's time to open up the application, you can just lift everything off of your resume and put it right into your application. You'll want to keep track of your supervisor's names, how many hours a week you worked, the dates that you worked or participated in these experiences. And it usually involves a short description of the experience that is a description, but also a short narrative of why that experience was important to you, what you learned from it, and reasons why it kind of brought you to where you are today. Usually these are pretty short descriptions, but it's something to start thinking about at this period of time.
Okay, so now we get into May, which is when, like we had talked about, which is when the application opens for you to start submitting, just at least inputting information on the platform in preparation for you to submit at the end of the month. So there's definitely the whole load of things that will go into this application. A lot of it includes like your personal information and like the grades that we had talked about. So you really want to be able to finalize that school list if you haven't done so already. So the MSAR, like we had talked about, is a great resource to be able to do that. You could reach out to older students who might have already got into med school from your college, or just friends or family that you know are also in med school, and really develop this list of schools that you want to apply to. You, like we discussed earlier, you want to have a balance of schools. So you want safety schools, target schools, and reach schools, really, and focusing around your MCAT and GPA. And you want to have a really diverse school list just based around that. There's many different things you want to be able to think about. So location is huge, obviously. Where would you like to study? Maybe it's something where there's a certain area of the country where you grew up and you'd like to be there. You want to have a support system in a certain part. Maybe you went away for college and you'd like to come back closer to home. There's many different parts to where students decide to apply to. And location is definitely a big part of it. You really want, med school is going to be difficult regardless of where you go. So if there's an area of the country where maybe you have a support system, or where you have something that you're familiar with, it might be worth applying to a school in that area as well. You do want to think about cost of living. The cost of living, as many of you are aware, varies tremendously across the country. Going to medical school in New York City is very different than going to a school out in the Midwest, and the cost of living is definitely a factor that you want to take into account. There's going to be financial aid packages that you'll be given for all the schools that you'll be accepted to. And then also you can look those up on the website of just generalized cost of what the tuition would be, and what generalized living expenses for most medical students. And you could try to reach out. Some medical schools will have current students who are on their admissions committee who are always happy to answer questions about that. You want to do your research on certain parts and certain programs that are available at schools. Is there like maybe a certain school is really focused on community service and they do work in a certain community that you're familiar with or you'd like to work with? Other schools are very research heavy and maybe they have an advisor or someone working in a specific area that you really hope to make part of your career. Maybe they just have a great balance of all of those things. Very different schools vary tremendously in terms of their strengths and weaknesses. Some schools are very balanced. Some schools really are research heavy. Some schools are not. So really getting a feel of what you really drives you and then what type of environment you want to be once you do enter medical school. And then the curriculum can also vary. So generally speaking, beforehand, most of the schools were pretty traditional, where you spent the first 2 years in med school and basically in the classroom in a lecture-based setting in preparation for your first board exam at the end of your second year. And then the last 2 years were really your clinical experiences during your third and fourth year. This is generally still true, but it still varies. There's a lot of variation. Some schools only do 18 months of preclinical work, and the learning style is very different. It may not be all lecture-based. It might be more individualized, or it might be like a flipped classroom where you read the course material or the textbook, like a chapter, and you come in for an hour or two, and you and a professor, and along with some of your classmates, are sitting down and really problem solving clinical questions. Learning and our knowledge of how students retain information has changed a lot over the past decade or so, and schools have changed how they present information and what they really want to focus on. So really look into the curriculum, and if it really aligns with how you think your learning style is and how you're going to be the most successful. So otherwise, you want to, these are just some things that you just want to make sure you do. None of these are difficult. You just don't want to, just because they're easy, you don't want to forget about them. So you want to make sure you request your transcripts from your school and have them sent over to the AMC. It can't be through you. Just so you maintain confidentiality and there's no evidence of tampering. So it'll go directly from the school, usually to the AMC, without any like a middleman in between. You also want to check in, I guess, also with your recommenders, like we had talked about. You're just about getting ready to submit. So if they haven't already told you when they're going to submit, just reach out to them and let them know about this deadline at the end of May, where you really want to be able to have your application ready to go. If you're applying to only allopathic schools, the MCAT scores are released automatically because it's the same system. If you're applying to some of the osteopathic schools and some of the Texas schools, you may need to go into the system and just manually release the MCAT scores to those specific schools, since they won't do it automatically. If the schools you're applying to do require the Casper test, I would recommend registering for that. You don't have to take it right away. The schools have various deadlines and you can look those up. It doesn't have to be in May specifically, but again, you want to try to get those. That is another part of your application that you want to try to have as soon as possible. The Casper is more of it's a different test than the preview exam that we were talking about. It's more focused on your competencies and your compassion, and essentially you're given different prompts and you are asked to respond and how you would respond in those situations. So, and you're timed for each of those. And if you just Google Casper, they have some practice requirements, so you could look at the general format of how the test is administered and over how long it is. And then finally, like Deanna was talking about, you had already started on your personal statement. You want to continue working on that and just really focus on editing the activities list as well as your personal statement. You want to have other readers take a look at it as well. So whether those be mentors, whether it be an older friend that you might have that's already in medical school, or someone that you really trust, just to take a look at your writing. You want to fix the grammar mistakes, but also make sure that your point is concise. and really getting across why you specifically want to attend medical school and how it'll help you achieve your career goals.
So as you move on into June of next summer, you'll want to make sure that those primary applications are submitted. I know we said at the end of May is when you can first submit, and that's the ideal time. But as you move on into the next few months, you are still able to submit the application if it's not right on that first day that it's available. So you want to make sure that you're editing and really reading through this application for very fine details before you hit that final submit button, just to make sure that you haven't missed any text boxes that need to be filled out, or if you haven't overfilled one of your text box and gone over on the character count and it's missing that last word. These are all the small details that you should be looking for when you're submitting that primary application, just to make sure that you don't look like you have anything left incomplete. At this time, you also just want to make sure that those letters of recommendation are uploaded to your application. And if they're not, send those recommenders one final reminder at this point. And now that your primary application is submitted, you have about maybe a week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks before those secondary applications start flooding your inbox. So now's the time it's not the time to rest yet. It's the time to buckle down and start writing those secondaries. So secondary prompts may change, may not change from year to year. So online, you can actually find a lot of resources that have different schools' prompts, but also Inspira Advantage keeps a database of prompts from year to year. So we do have that available for our clients. Even if the prompts change, you can be writing these essays ahead of time, because I can bet that there's another school that's going to ask you a similar question, and you can just easily take what you've already written in a nice polished essay and put it into their secondary, and be able to check that box of, yes, I've done this and I can submit it right away. Pre-writing your secondaries just helps you be more efficient in this process, because it can get to be a lot of essays that you're writing and a lot of them overlap. And so it's best to try to stay organized and have some pre-written topics so that you can move on and make this an efficient process for you. Then use these templates and be able to turn them around pretty quickly. So that way you can get them back within about 2 weeks to those med schools, so that they know you are excited to apply and are interested.
So by the time you get into July, you would have hopefully at least submitted the primary application. You're either waiting for it to be verified, or your secondaries are starting to come in. So like Deanna was talking about, you could obviously be, even if you haven't started getting the secondaries, but in July, you most likely will, either towards the end of July or starting in August, depending on when you submitted your primary. So you can start pre-writing those applications just based on looking online on what they were the year prior. And just giving yourself a leg up, so it'll be a little bit less burden on you once you really get into the swing of things later in August and September. If you're starting to get a bunch of secondaries, it'll be hard to keep up with the pace, and you really want to be able to, like we had said, try to turn these around in at least 2 weeks from when you receive them.
As you move on later into the fall and into the spring of the next year, this is when you're going to start getting interview invites. And this is the time that you want to be as prepared as possible for those interview invites. You want to make sure that you understand what kind of interview formats the medical school that you've been invited to is going to use. There's like traditional one-on-one interviews. There's panel type interviews where it's you as one person and maybe, a group of people are asking you questions. There's group interviews where there's multiple students that are being interviewed. There's video interviews where you submit pre-recorded videos. And then there's also multiple mini interviews, which will be stations where you kind of are like speed dating with people at the medical school who are asking you quick, like 10-minute questions. So you want to make sure that you understand what you're walking into on that interview day. You also may want to send letters of interest at this point, which are can be done either before or after interviews, depending on how you feel. Those are good to give medical schools. Just say, hey, I'm still interested. Please, consider me for your school. You can also look over the financial aid packages that schools may have to offer, and maybe that'll help guide your decision if you do get multiple offers. And then it's your time to pick a place to go. You get to accept an offer at this point, which is the most exciting part of this whole process.
Okay, so just a couple of quick things about what you can do to become a little bit more competitive. So there's no secret to this. The biggest and most important thing about being a competitive applicant is keeping your grades up. You want to get as great of a GPA as you can, really focusing on that science GPA, but also keep in line with your other coursework as well. Don't only focus on your science GPA. You want to get the best GPA as you possibly can. And do what you do as much as you can to really focus on that, whether it's extra tutoring, reaching out to your professors, etc. Likewise, you really want to focus on this MCAT. It's the one test that all students applying to medical schools have to take. So it's the one thing that everyone does, and it's something that helps to compare everyone on a level playing field. So you do want to get as great of a score as you can. And how you study really depends on your own learning style. And that's something that you can gain insight into, or you could always ask others. Inspira Advantage is some resources for this, but also there's many different ways you could really learn on how to study best for this exam. You want to continue to seek out experiences like we had talked about, whether they're medical rated, even non-medical rated as well. Medical schools love teaching experience, so you really want, and volunteering experience, even if it's not in a hospital setting. You really would just want to show that you can be a well-rounded applicant and that you truly care about the causes that you're really interested in. So we always recommend on doing any activity that you do, make sure you do it long-term. You don't want to just volunteer at a hospital for 1 day or 1 week and just to put on your application. You really want to do something long-term. You want to really spend time creating the CV, and it'll just help you while you're getting ready for the application. So you can just start to compile all the activities you've done and put it into one place, so you can start and think about how you want to talk about each of these experiences or what you really gained from them. That'll definitely save you a lot of time as you come into the application cycle, and it'll definitely be a great talking point for any interviews you attend later in the year. You can start to think about what it is why you want to go to medical school and how it really helps you shape your career and what you hope your career will look like, and what you really want to convey to medical schools in this personal statement. It's going to take you time regardless. So you might if you do have the time now, it's okay to start thinking about it, and even just jotting a couple of thoughts down on a piece of paper and coming back to it maybe every couple of weeks. It doesn't have to be something that you do always at the end of the year or right before the application opens up. And the biggest thing is there's going to be a lot of deadlines that you see, whether it's the main one is going to be the MCAT deadline, but there's going to be deadlines for if you decide to apply to osteopathic schools, Texas schools. Then you have secondary deadlines. You have deadlines of when to respond to interviews by. So just making sure you're organized, and however you do that, whether it's like a list, whether you put it into your calendar, whatever works for you, it's going to be crucial to stay on top of all of the deadlines that are coming up.
And some last tips just to make your application as successful as possible. Submitting that application as early as possible is going to be your ticket to getting basically FaceTime with the medical schools as much as you can. By the time you submit an application in September, maybe half their spots are filled already. So you want to be able to get your application seen by the admissions committee as soon as possible. That also is going to mean staying on top of your deadlines, like Parth was saying, and also making sure that your recommenders understand what your deadlines are and you're getting them the materials they need in order to be successful in writing your letters. Pre-writing your secondaries is going to be key to staying on top of this bombardment of your inbox at that point, because you're going to be asked to write a lot of essays and you're going to want to have them picked out for you already, and so that you can just copy and paste and tailor them to the school that and put any specific details that they're asking you. And I think the last thing, and probably one of the more important things, is that consider your application persona, which is basically your application as a whole. What is the big picture of your application? Does it represent you as a person? Does every single thing in your application provide you with some high quality, compelling detail about you? You know, if I fill my application with experiences, but all of them are 1 hour a week, that's very different than, you know, listing fewer experiences that were much higher quality and quantity. You want to make sure that every single piece of your personal statement, every single experience that you're listing is something that you can speak to and that says something about you. And then the last thing is going to be edit, edit, edit. Every single word on this application, you should be reading it multiple times to make sure that you're not mistyping grammar, content, making sure that every text box is filled out on that application, no blanks on the final PDF that you can download before you submit. You just want to make sure that it is complete and thorough and 100% done as possible. And that's just going to be reading, reading, reading over and over again.
All right, that brings us to the end of our presentation. So we'll open it up. We have a couple more minutes for Q&As. We have one question. Deanna or Parth, do you recommend any good MCAT prep courses or programs? And obviously,
I personally did an MCAT prep. Oh gosh, yeah.
But also any other thoughts that you have there?
I think it's very individual to you as a person. If you know you need the structure of a course, then absolutely look into those resources. There's multiple different companies out there that are doing the same thing, and maybe in different ways. Some of them are in person, some of them are virtual. And it just depends on, you know, whether you want to buy the books and study, or if you need someone to kind of help you go through that process and keep you on track. It's definitely an individualized situation though.
Definitely agree. I think, and if cost is a big barrier, I know some of these courses can be tremendously expensive. So sometimes buying the books and studying on your own, and there's also free resources out there. Like one that comes to mind is Khan Academy, which is a great resource, and it's free. So the resources are definitely out there. It's really just depending on how you study and if you need more structure, if you think you can manage your own schedule.
And Inspira Advantage has tutors as well. So if you want some individualized, personalized study help, we are available. What stage can Inspira help with this process? I mean, I can take this and then would love for both of you to hop in as well. But Inspira is really here for every stage of this process, from beginning to think about preparing your application when you're wrapping up college the year before, to if you just want someone to look over your secondaries and help with interview prep, basically any part of the process that you need help with in the full process. MCAT studying, residency application support we do as well. Deanna or Parth, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's what we're here for. We're here to help you with whatever part of this process that you need, whether it be every step of the way or just some particular parts of your application that you need help with. You know, I think our major goal is to keep you on track and to make sure everything is as high quality as possible.
Definitely agree.
For MCAT study, how do we help? I'm not sure if either of you do MCAT tutoring, but I know that we have specialized MCAT tutors who they take a lot of time to understand what you need help with through diagnostic tests, a lot of conversations. They work to understand how you study, where you need the most help, and then we'll build study plans for you. They'll hold you accountable. You can meet weekly, every other week, to go over questions, to talk things out. It's really tailored to your own study habits and needs though. So if you want someone to look things over for you and discuss them, they're there. If you need someone to sit and study with you every week, they're there as well. So if anyone else has any more questions, feel free to pop it in. We have another couple minutes. So this time I'll put Parth and Deanna on the spot and say, what do you wish you had known before you started the application process for med school?
I think one of the things that I think is really helpful that I actually didn't do was two things, I guess. One is pre-writing my resume and then pre-writing the secondaries. This really depends on how many schools you apply to, but it can definitely, the secondaries at least can definitely become overwhelming because they're going to come back to back to back, like within a couple of days, depending on when your application was submitted, because your schools are all going to receive your application at the same time. So I can't harp on this enough. I actually didn't do that, and I really wish I had, and it'll just save you a lot of stress come time for writing those secondaries. And similarly with the resume, I can definitely remember I was putting together my resume a little bit in the spring, just right before the application was due. And I think I wish I had just put it together a little bit sooner, or kept track of it while the experiences were happening. It'll just save you time, but also your experience will be happening, and you can reflect on them and really write down why you pursued those experiences and how it's really shaped you and informs your future career goals.
I completely agree with everything he just said. I think we all have things that we wish we would have done better in the process. For me, I think I would have called on my mentors a little bit more to people that have been through the process already, because I think there were small details that maybe I probably could have optimized and that I just didn't know about. Like making sure to, really fully explain my experiences and have that resume pretty solid by the time the application started. I think I also would have started doing like extracurricular activities sooner if I had known beforehand that, those shadowing and volunteer opportunities don't always come around at the time that you need them. And so I would have started looking for those opportunities much sooner.
Thank you both for that. It's great information and great tips for everyone who's joined. All right, well, I think that wraps us up for today. I want to thank you both for being here. You've given a lot of great information. Thank you so much for your time. And to everyone who joined, you'll get an email within the next day or two with a recording of this webinar. Feel free to reach out to the Inspira Advantage team. We're here to help you. You can send us an email, schedule a consultation on our website that's free. Give us a call. We're definitely around to help out. I hope everyone has a really great night and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.